Okay, welcome to a new unit, Unit 4, Expansion and Reform. We're going to be talking about what's going on in America from 1800 up to 1860, just approaching the start of the Civil War. Now, if you are not in class, make sure that you see me and get a copy of this map, a map of the United States in 1800. Obviously, a lot of boundary lines look very different. It is so important that you understand these territories, what they're called, what the various interests in them were, which countries had influence over them. So please make sure you see me to get a copy of this map. You can see right here, this is a version of the map you can use to fill out your own. You'll notice the borders around France are a little bit different. You can see Texas is carved out a little bit more similarly to its current shape on the first map. It's hard to get maps that are super precise from this point in time because there were so many changes happening nearly constantly. But if you look at this map here, you can see that by no means is the United States solely English. We've got an enormous piece of territory owned by the French, by the Spanish, a big chunk of unclaimed territory in the Pacific Northwest. But this just shows what was happening in the United States as of July 10th, 1800. So I'm going to go over a little timeline of our relationship to other countries, specifically to Great Britain after the Revolutionary period. So we know in 1783, the Peace of Paris, the Treaty of Paris is signed between Britain and the United States. They agree to cease all conflict, and the British leave North America, really. And so now we have a new people who are considered to be Americans and not English, and we have an independent nation, although it's not the whole size of the nation that we know today. There will be a lot of work, a lot of labor, and a lot of disagreement over adding all of the territories that now are part of the United States. So, back to America's relationship with Great Britain. In the 1790s, Great Britain, vengeful for their loss in the American Revolution, they start this practice of harassing American trade ships with what we call impressment. Essentially, British trade ships would sail accompanied by military vessels, and they would trap or come aboard American trading ships, so non-military ships, and they would often capture these merchants. In fact, in some cases, they did this with American naval vessels, with military ships, and so impressment is essentially taking hold of someone else's ship and capturing the people on board to sail in your own navy. Somewhat as prisoners. So the British are practicing this in small numbers, and the Americans are increasingly, of course, irritated and outraged and concerned about this pattern because they see it as a complete violation of the 1783 treaty. In 1794, John Jay, serving as Secretary of State, gets a treaty signed between Britain and the United States, and it's called the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation between His Britannic Majesty and the United States of America, which is so easy to remember. So easy. No, you don't have to know the full name of that 1794 treaty because everyone calls it the Jay Treaty, and that's easy enough to remember because it was brokered by John Jay. So the Jay Treaty has a number of terms, but these are the most significant. Britain had occupied that territory in the Pacific Northwest, what is considered to just be unclaimed as of 1800. So they agreed to evacuate that land. They also decide that Mississippi will be considered neutral territory. Now, Mississippi falls within the bounds of the Louisiana Purchase. However, the French, going through their own revolution, really did not have a way to enforce control over Mississippi. So the British and the French were both interested in it, but wanting to avoid a war, they agree that that will simply be neutral. The U.S. also gets trading rights in British territories. Of course, we know Great Britain, they say the sun never sets on the British Empire because they had so much land all over the world. As sort of repayment for the aggression of impressment, the U.S. is granted access to British territories for trade. And the whole goal of this is to avoid a second war with Great Britain. The Jay Treaty was not universally accepted. Federalists such as John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, they were both supportive of the treaty. On the other hand, the anti-federalists, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they felt that signing such a broad international agreement, especially one that affected trading behavior, was a violation and an overreach of federal power. The anti-federalists, keep in mind, are people who are concerned about the size of the federal government. They want more power in the hands of individual states and a reduced size in federal government. So a big trade deal like this, for an anti-federalist, seems like the government getting too involved. And this is where we start to really see some important dividing lines between what will eventually become our two main parties, Democrats and Democrats and Republicans. Okay, we are going to complete a little graphic organizer here where I'm just going to give you some pieces of essential information, but in order to actually learn something, rather than simply copying the work down, I'd like you to paraphrase the information that you see in the table. That being said, it is awfully hard to paraphrase something if you don't know what it means. And if you're watching this video, it means you're on your computer and you can just minimize this tab or open a new one and go to Google and type in the word and look it up. It's very hard to paraphrase if you don't know what a word means. If you're in class, you get to do this with a partner. If you're at home, I guess you got to do it by yourself. So I would highly recommend pressing pause and making sure that you can see this whole document. I realize that some of it's going to get cut off by this frame on the screen. Hopefully this is still legible. What I'll do is I'm going to move my screen over to the left, and you can feel free to take a photo of it. I'm going to move it over here to the right, just in case you're not sure how to complete those words at either end. But either way, what I would like you to do, you're going to have a piece of paper that looks like this chart. Make sure you get that from me. If you didn't get it, or you don't want to, or you want to just hurry up and get started, you can recreate this chart. What I would like you to fill in is from views on the Constitution down. I'd like you to paraphrase. For those first two lines, the party leaders line and the major sources line, you can just write those down. Those do not need to be paraphrased. They're just lists, but you should be paraphrasing everything from views on the Constitution down. This is just an interesting graphic. A lot of people think there's only two political parties in the United States. There are many. Just the way that our system works, it does kind of tend to pull people towards just two parties, but there are many others. There's Libertarians, Green Party, Constitution Party, there's the Contemporary Whig Party. There are other political parties in the United States. All right, we're not going to do this. Don't worry about it if you see it on the PowerPoint. So when we talk about political parties, it's important to acknowledge that the concept of a two-party system was by no means popular with all of the framers of the early nation. Probably the most ardent opponent of a two-party system was George Washington. Now, George Washington resigns from the presidency on March 4th, 1797, which is an absolutely staggeringly bold and important decision because George Washington was wildly popular and he's the first president, so he can set the precedent for how long someone will serve. George Washington could have been president until he died, but he chose to walk away. And he chose to walk away because he believed that the only way to know that our country was stable was for it to be able to pass to different people with different interests and still maintain the values and the rules laid out in the Constitution. So I kind of just answered this question for you, but this is an important one to think about. If you'd like, you're welcome to read through these. These are some pieces from George Washington's parting letters, some farewell addresses. He gave more than one farewell address, as you can see, one on September 17th, one on September 19th. So well before he actually leaves office, he begins somewhat of a farewell tour, speaking to individual districts and just going and expressing his goals and his hopes for the country as it moved on without him. One of the things that George Washington spoke about often in this farewell tour was the danger of what he called partisanship, the idea of being more devoted to a party than to the universal goals and ideals of a nation. So if you're in class, you're going to get to see these two little videos. These are kind of just silly, but they're interesting representations of different political opinions and ideas, and how many Americans hold ideas that are more Democratic or more Republican. Very few people are only ascribed to one party's platform. However, because of our voting system, people do have to sort of pick one or the other, and that was exactly what George Washington was afraid of. So I would like you to think about what you know about our current political party system, about the conflict that exists between parties, about people you know and interact with who have maybe particularly partisan political opinions. And I'd like you to take that personal experience that you have, write me one full paragraph, so that's 5 sentences or more, and explain why you think George Washington warned against the formation of political parties. All right, we're going to stop here. The next PowerPoint, we're going to pick up with the election of 1796.